Well, we are in our Genesis series, and today we're going to be looking at Genesis 1, verse 3 through 25. So last week we talked a lot about the chaos and how Genesis 1 and 2 talk about God hovering over the waters and creating order out of the chaos that's there. There's all this chaos, and God brings order to that. But this week, I want to just take some time to look at the 6 days of creation and how God makes something good and what his creation says about who he is and how he creates, I think, his creation out of his own identity, out of his own being, and how we can discover that. It's really cool because Scripture tells us why God did what he did. Science helps us understand how. Theology helps us understand why. So the Bible's answering the question of why does God do these things? Why is the world this way? But science can help us figure out how is this? How can we know more about God? And so we want to just kind of spend a little bit of time looking at the 6 days of creation. We're going to stop when God creates the animals. Next week, we're going to pick up and talk about what it means to have the image of God, to be the image bearers of who God is, and that's an exciting sermon. That's going to be a whole topic, so we're going to dive into that because that's really important. But today I just want to take some time to look at Genesis. So we want to read the Word of God together. We believe what it says, and we want to understand it. So let's read this section together, and then we're just going to talk about what I've learned and what I see in the text and how I think it tells us who God is. So let's start with Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse." God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called sea. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit bearing fruit in which is their seed, according to its kind, on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kind, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate day from night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years, and let them all be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light to the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the 4th day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the that it was good. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it beautiful what God created? We can look around the world around us and we can see God's beautiful creation in everything. And we can use science, we can use our God-given minds to help understand who God is. And so we're going to look at this together. Day 1, God separates the light and the darkness. Y'all may know a whole lot more than I know about science. So this is some of the research that I did, and I don't claim that I understand all of this. I don't really know that I understand much of it. I scratched the surface and then thought, wow, what does that say about God? So if some facts or figures are wrong, just give me the favor, right? Just ride with me. Let's just see what God has, and let's see what it says about him. So this is what I've learned. There's light, and the properties of light, there's a duality to light. It's both a wave and a particle. It's interesting. I don't really know what that means, but there you go. There's two aspects of it. So light has a cool thing that it can reflect and refract. So you can see on the image on this next slide that light can have a mirror effect where light will hit a mirror and it will bounce off at the same angle that it hits. But it also can hit water and it can change how it, let's see, I want to make sure I say this right. It bounces and bends and passes through material by refraction. And that's really cool that light can do both of these things. Light also gives us color, that there's different wavelengths of light. And if you look at the energy that's passed through light, if it's a red has less energy and it's a bigger wavelength, and then blue has a smaller wavelength and it's much more energy. So when there's high UVs and you get a sunburn, it's because there's more energy in the blue light than the other colors of light. So light is this really cool thing that has all kinds of wavelengths and particles, and it's just amazing to stop and think. And I just scratch the surface. I don't really understand much of this, but I'll give you that. The coolest thing I found in my research about light this week is that the speed of light is the most accurate known constant in our world. The speed of light is the most accurate known constant. This is why we say something is X number of light years away. That's how we judge things. Because when there's not trees and feet and miles, what's a constant that we can use to measure something? The speed of light. We can say this planet is so far away by the speed of light. And so then I stopped and I said, well, what does all this say about the character of God? And I got to tell you, that thing about the accuracy and consistency of the speed of light just makes me stop and think the consistency of what God built our world with. From the very beginning, he separates light, and there is amazing consistency to how he does it. That it's an accurate, consistent way of looking at the world. God separates the light, and he brings consistency to his creation. Day 2, God separates the waters. Now, we'll remember last week that in ancient Near East, they would say everything was water. God separated the waters. There's water above and water below them. And so when God separates the water, he demonstrates his power. That the only thing that's there is water, and God can separate it. Well, how much water does God separate? Well, we know that the Earth's surface is 75% water. And that's a lot of water. But I was like, okay, so what does that really mean? Water was a little easier for me because I kind of understand it better than light. So here's the information that I got about water. If you took all the water that's on the ground, all the groundwater in the world, it's 5.6 million cubic miles. Excuse me. 5.6 million cubic miles. So Finnville is basically 1 mile by 1 mile, the city of Finnville. So if you took the city of Finnville and you filled it 1 mile up with water, 5.6 million of those would be the amount of groundwater that's in our world. That makes up only 1.7% of the total water in the world. It's just a scratch of the surface. Another big chunk is the ice caps, glaciers, and permanent snow. You hear people, they're always worried about the glaciers, right? So those huge, massive glaciers that are out there, 6.7 million cubic feet. So there's 5.6 million, 6.7 million cubic miles, not feet, cubic miles of water. That makes up 1.74%. So we haven't even gotten to 4% of the water with all the groundwater in the world and the ice caps and glaciers and snow melt, or permanent snow. So the oceans, the sea, and the bays make 321 million cubic miles of water. 321 million Finnvilles filled 1 mile high with water is how much water there is on the planet, 75%. And with one word, God goes and he separates the water. He has the power, he has the authority over the water to separate that. So what are the properties of water? What do we know about water? Well, we know that humans are 60% water, and that really helps us because water doesn't change temperature very easy, and that's a good thing. So that when we run outside to our car, we're 60% water, so it doesn't freeze on our way out to our car. We can stay. Some of us feel like we're frozen by the time we get out there. Or if it's really hot, that we have water that helps regulate our body temperature. We know that all living cells are 75 to 95% water. So God has water. He creates water. And he can separate. He has authority over it. And this water that the earth has helps stabilize it. Helps stabilize the temperature of the earth. It helps stabilize us. It helps keep life going. Another interesting aspect of water is that there's hydrogen bonding. So water can collect, and like if you see water, if I spilled a little bit of water, which I usually do, water will bead and it'll pull together because it has hydrogen bonding, and it bonds together and kind of circles up. It's not just flat like an oil, but it circles up. And this is actually a really important aspect because it creates surface tension. And we know about surface tension that you can have like a mosquito land on top, or I saw a picture of the Jesus lizard that runs across the top of the water because of the surface tension. Hydrogen bonding helps water stick together. This is actually really important for water being able to adhere or crawl up. And this is actually one of the elements of our world, or one of the facts of our world, that's really important because you can have redwood trees that are hundreds of feet tall, and yet water can adhere and go up against gravity to get water to the leaves of a tree that are way up there, way against gravity. God created it in such a beautiful and designful way. So God has total power over the waters. All that was there was water, and he knows how it works, and he was able to separate the water and have total power over it. But by separating the water, he creates the sky. So now, science has helped us. We know that there's not just water above us that's kind of holding us in. We know now that the sky is actually limitless, that the sky just goes on and on and on. And so I learned this week. Again, I don't know a whole bunch of this. You guys might know more if you're a pilot or you know more about the sky. But the first 10 miles is where commercial jets and mountains and all of that happens. That's mostly what we see is 10 miles up. And that's mostly where things happen. That's the troposphere. The next 10 miles, 10 to 20 miles, is the stratosphere. And that's where weather balloons are at. Commercial jets don't fly that high. 20 to 30 miles up. Then 30 to 50 miles up is the mesosphere. I think I'm saying that right, which is where sounding rockets and meteors are. Think about that, 30 to 50 miles up. 50 plus miles is the thermosphere. So what does any of that mean? Well, what that means to me, when I looked at that, I just thought of the more we learn about God, the more that science stops and understands and figures things out, how big and limitless and expansive God is. That we can look out and we can keep going further and further and further. And the more we apply ourselves, the more we try to understand God, the more we think, wow, this guy has to be big. God has to be huge, that it just keeps going and going. So the two characteristics that I see from day 2 of God separating the water is his sheer power over the only thing that was there, and his limitlessness is the more that we learn, the more we see God continues forever and ever. That he's got to be massive. As are just the first 2 days. He's still, remember like we talked about last week, he's still just creating space. He's not even filling it yet. Day 3, the beauty of land. So this is really fascinating. It blows my mind that there are 4 families of rocks. You take a geology class, there's 4 families of rocks. There's igneous rocks, which are from magma. There's sedimentary rocks, which are broken down rocks. There's metamorphic rocks, which are rocks that have been subject to heat and pressure. And then there's minerals. And minerals I don't really understand. There's some 5-point criteria in which you have to line it up to see if it's a mineral or it's a rock. I don't get it. Maybe you guys get it. But whatever the case is, there's 4 major families of rock. And if you look at the way that rock is and how it interacts with other things, that it's never the same. It's different in different places, in different geographies, in different landmass. And you can see the variance that's there. And that's not even touching the soil. There's 4 types of soil, main types of soil. There's sand, loam, silt, and clay. So now you can take 4 major types of soil, and they get all mixed together in different ways and different types of soil. And you have all these rocks that are different types of rocks, and that creates this beautiful landscape that if you're ever driving, you can just see how the land changes, how it shifts, how it goes up and down. But more than just up and down, if you look closely, you can see how the vegetation around it begins to change, because plants don't just receive water from the leaves, but from the ground. And the different mixtures of soil and the different mixtures of rock make different types of vegetation. And so in day 3, God also creates vegetation. Before we go to the next slide, go back one slide real quick. Before we go to the next slide, I saw this map of Michigan, and it is a good one. And there are some really amazing maps of how you can just see the ring of Michigan, the different types of rock that circle from the inside and circle out, and how it changes. That when you drive, like you drive north and you see those changes that happen, it has to do with how God created rock and how the rock works and the soil works that changes the vegetation. I just thought that was really good. And then he calls it good. He makes the land and calls it good. And then it's vegetation. Day 3 has 2 parts. It's the land and the vegetation. So God creates the vegetation. There are about 391,000 species of plant currently known to science. 391,000 species of plants currently known, of which 369,000 are flowering plants. So 94% of the plants that we know of are flowering plants. There are over 20,000 species of edible plants in the world. So if you don't like your veggies, I'm guessing you haven't tried them all. There's a lot more veggies out there to try. You probably only tried 1,000, 2,000 veggies. There's 18,000 more vegetables for you to try around our world, and you can cook them all differently. And about 2,000 new plant species are discovered every year or recategorized. There's constant new information coming and ways of us tracking it and all over the world. It's unbelievable, the uniqueness of God. And I think that's the point, the characteristic of God that I see from the 3rd day is the life-giving uniqueness of God. That When he was creating the rocks and he's creating the soil and he's creating the vegetation, he was like, yeah, I could use one type of grass for the whole world. But wouldn't it be cool if we made 4 different kinds and we mixed them together, and we mixed them with different soils and then all these unique plants. And you look out here behind us, there's that blueberry farm. If you look at all those blueberry bushes, not a single blueberry bush of the same kind is identical. They all are unique. Isn't that cool? God's uniqueness in what he builds. That he gives life and he gives it uniquely. That he loves diversity. He loves changes. He loves things to be moving. It doesn't have to be static. It doesn't have to be the way that we would understand everything. The way we understand it to be tight. He loves uniqueness. So those are the first 3 days. He's created space. And then day 4, he creates the lights. The sun and the moon and the stars. So what do we know about the sun? Well, it's a continual supply of energy. That the sun is the biggest in our galaxy. That everything revolves around the sun. And that's because of its size. That there's a gravitational pull to the size of the sun that keeps these other planets around it and moving where they ought to be. So, how big is the sun? If you were to take the earth and you were to stack the earth end to end, it would take 100 earths to get the circumference of the sun. That's how big the sun is. Or another way of looking at it, if the sun was a big jar and you took the top off of it and you put all the planets in our galaxy into it, put all 8 planets in there, you could fill the sun 600 times with all the planets. That's how big the sun is. It is this massive anchor in our galaxy that everything revolves around. That is just massive. But this gravity, combined with the heat, the core of the sun reaches temperatures of at least 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. You thought it was hot this summer. Think about how hot that is. 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. And that heat combines with the gravity, which fuses together hydrogen and creates helium. And that is called thermonuclear fusion. And that releases energy in the forms of radiation, electricity, solar wind, and what you and I call a nice warm Michigan day. That's how God created the sun. This is a massive fusion bomb that keeps going off constantly. And this is this constant source. What about the moon? What do we know about the moon? Well, we know that the moon helps our Earth because of the gravitational pull that the moon has around the Earth, that as it passes, its gravitational pull changes the water on our Earth. So the Earth kind of elongates a little where the oceans are towards where the moon is. And as the moon passes, it changes. And that's what changes the tides in the ocean, where they go in and out and move up and down. And it keeps the water circulating and moving throughout our world. The moon plays an important part in how our world functions because of the gravitational pull that it has on the tides. And the stars are hydrogen explosions that keep going off. Time and time again, hydrogen explosions. And those are the stars that we can look out and we can see. Why are these hydrogen explosions going off? Just because. It's because he can. Because he's that big. Because it's cool. Because God loves it. So what does this say about the character of God? What he fills the space with are the lights. I think it says that God is an anchor. That God creates the anchor of our galaxy because he is the anchor. That his gravitational pull holds everything together. That God holds the whole thing together. That's how big the sun is, but how big is our God? And that God is the source of energy. Just like the sun is the source of energy for our galaxy, so God is the source of energy for everything that happens for us. Everything that happens around us. God is the source. He's our anchor and our source of energy. Day 5, God fills. the waters, and the sky. So sea creatures, there are freshwater and saltwater species. In North America alone, there are 800 known species of freshwater fish. 800 species of freshwater fish in North America alone. 10,000 worldwide. 10,000 species. Saltwater, 33,600 different types. 33,000. You take the 10,000 of saltwater or freshwater and the 33,000 of saltwater, and you just think, those are just types of fish. In the ocean, you can see that there are single-celled organisms on the next slide that are just one cell, all the way that are small one-cell organisms. That's the biggest of the single-cell organisms in the ocean, all the way to the blue whale. 32 yards long. Oh, what the Minnesota Vikings would give to have a kicker that could kick the ball 32 feet or 32 yards, right, and hit a field goal. That's long. 32 yards long. That is an amazing animal. The biggest animal that God created is in the sea. He has it all, from the littlest to the biggest. 80% of the ocean is unmapped and unexplored. We're just scratching the surface of what the ocean has. We're just now getting ships that can handle the pressure to get far enough to take pictures of things that we didn't think could exist because of the pressure. But they're finding that there are organisms down there in the depths, in the dark of the ocean that exist. And what about the birds? There's 18,000 species in the world. 18,000 species of birds that God created. But if you take just one bird, the hummingbird, there's 325 plus types of hummingbird alone. Hummingbird just by itself, 325. And then some other goober was like, well, it depends on how you count. If you count it this way, it's like 300 plus hummingbirds? That's insane. Their wings are so fast, the large ones will go 12 beats per minute to hold in place. The smallest ones can do 80 beats per minute. A hummingbird, just 80 beats per minute to hold itself in place, just flapping its wings. Hummingbirds can dive at speeds in excess of 49 miles an hour. Little tiny hummingbird, 49 miles an hour. Like just, can you imagine? And all of the different kinds of hummingbirds that there are, God creates an incredible world. Full of uniqueness, full of design. The two things that stand out to me when I look at this, when I look at the sea creatures and the birds, is the incomprehensible acts of God. We can't even begin to scratch the surface on the ocean. We only know 20% of what's there. And there's all these things, all these beautiful creatures, all these strange ones. Like, it's just mind-blowing. Like, how could we ever even begin to comprehend or understand who God is? And yet, God calls it good, and he blesses them. And he tells them to multiply. God calls this good. Day 6, God creates the animals. And what's interesting in the text is that there's 3 groups of animals that God creates. There's the livestock, which we would call domestic, or that we use as food, farm animals, sheep, cows, goats. But then there's the creeping things, which are the small animals. Some we call pests, some we call pets. There's different small animals that we get to experience. And then the craziest thing is that the Bible specifies that he creates the wild animals, the beasts. What we think of as lions and tigers and bears, oh my. He creates those. What's really interesting is how the biblical authors start reflecting on this passage as the text goes on. And there's the Leviathan, which is a mythical creature that the Bible references quite frequently. It's in Job, Psalms, Isaiah, and Amos. There's 4 books in the Old Testament that talk about the Leviathan. And in Job, they talk about a dragon too. Like, it's part of how God responds to Job. God creates the livestock. We love it. God creates the cute little pets we love. We're so filled with joy that we get to hold our cat at night. We get to pet our dog. And then God creates the terrifying lions. God creates the terrifying Leviathan. He creates the things that just make us so scared and so worried. God creates all of that. So what does that say about the character of God? That God can create that which is joyful, and he can create that which is terrifying. That God is both joyful and he's terrifying. And we can see that just by looking at his creation. As I spent time this week on this last slide looking at these different aspects of God, I see that God is consistent from the start. He's extremely powerful and never-ending. That he gives life uniqueness and diversity. He is the anchor and the source of energy. He is incomprehensible. He makes creatures that are terrifying and joyful because he calls it good. Because he calls it good. There's aspects of God that we can learn from just by observing him, by observing the world around us, and that he calls these things good. Why? Why are they good? What makes these things so good? It's his own goodness that he creates goodness out of. It may be terrifying for us. It may be joy-filled. It may be any of these other adjectives, but God creates it because it's his own goodness. And this goodness draws us back to him. It reminds us of him. It encourages us of him. It shows us of him that the creation, the world, is all about God. It's all about his true character and who he is. And the more we apply ourselves to science, the more we stop and ponder and think about the uniqueness and the differences of the world, we can see that God is in control. That it's God's goodness and it's who God is that we get to worship. Let me pray for you. God, we are so grateful and thankful that you have made our world so beautiful, that you've made it so complex, that you've made it so good. And God, we're thankful for you. We are so thankful, God. I pray, God, that you would help us to begin to look at our world, to look at the things around us, and to see your goodness, and that we'd be reminded of how good you are. You are so good and so great, and we love you, and we thank you that you love us, and you give us an opportunity to know you through your creation. In your name we pray.